Welcome. Today we're talking about branding and brand building. And of course, I had a couple of questions after I sent out the email last night about branding. And so we are going to answer those, even though whether or not the people who ask the questions actually show up, they'll at least see the discussion recorded and everything else. So that's kind of fun. So we'll start with that, and then we'll dive into the agenda. So the agenda for today, or the planned agenda, is basically target audience, colors, typography, logos, other brand opportunities, brand briefs, brand boards, etc., and how effective is your brand. And I know Angel and Ali, you guys have been working with brands for a long time, so feel free to jump in whenever there's something that I'm not covering completely, or that there's a better way to talk about it. So, of course, the first thing that everybody's talking about is Cracker Barrel. And this is not an aviation brand. This is a restaurant chain in the United States that has a very iconic, very old-fashioned brand. And their target market is, older populations in the United States. So it's a very traditional market.
Let me just modify what you said.
Okay.
Everybody isn't talking about it. People in the U.S. are.
People
You
in the
are
U.S. are talking
international.
about it. That's true. I think every marketing group that I am a part of, every online group, every in-person group, every virtual group, every other group is talking about this. So what happened basically is that Cracker Barrel rebranded from this complex logo to a simpler version. There was a lot of discussion about it online and things like that. They ended up actually going back to their previous logo after the president of the United States weighed in on this. It's just kind of a crazy situation where things are stranger than you would expect. Then they went back to their old logo. So, was that a bad move? Was it a good move? Was it a bad move that they turned around? It's hard to say because, it's very early. This happened during summer of 2025. It is now September. So, we can't really see a change in their sales or anything along those lines, or their revenues or anything like that. All we can see is the leading indicators, which are like brand visibility and earned media, is what we call that when people are actually talking about them, and engagement, across demographics. So, I'd just love to hear your opinions of, was this a good move? Was this a bad move? Was it a bad move that they recovered from? You know, uh,
Well, if you think about it from the
yeah.
perspective of the majority of countries in the world, companies in the world,
Mhm.
it was a bad move.
Mm.
You don't see Pepsi, Coke, Mercedes, BMW, Audi, any of those guys trying to change
Mm.
brand.
Mhm.
These guys, for whatever reason, once they tried to change it, they at least saw the error of their ways and put it back. Now, what remains to be seen is, will they recover? And if they recover, will they recover to better than where they were?
Mhm.
I don't think that could have been a planned approach.
Mhm. And of course, this isn't an aviation brand, but it is
No, but
very instructive.
well, you don't see Beechcraft hasn't changed theirs. Bell hasn't changed theirs. Uh,
We'll talk about
you
those in
pick
just a minute.
any of the top 5 or 6 aviation companies, they don't change. They haven't changed their brand since inception.
Right. I used to work for Wells Fargo, and every new employee within their first quarter of being hired would have to go to a half a day of brand camp. And, you'd get a whole bunch of swag and T-shirts and hats and everything else, but, the main thing was just basically, or the main messaging of that brand camp was, "We are custodians of a 100-year-old brand," 130-year-old brand, I think is what it was. We do not change anything, we do not come within 20 pixels of the logo, we do not, we use these colors. They had trademark colors, they had trademarked fonts, in their logo, so, those are things that they take very, very seriously, so I think they would be in agreement with John. Angel or Ali, do you have any opinions about I don't know if you even have heard about the Cracker Barrel controversy.
For me, how to say this? I'm really not aware of that brand because
Uh-huh.
I know it's an US brand, but because of their change, I saw a tweet or in X about it, and say I was more aware of that brand because of that change that they did. So I was able to know that brand and uh, the news once the algorithm in my X came to a lot of news articles about that brand. So it made me aware. So I don't know if it's a good or bad thing, but yeah, that's it.
But you'd never heard of Cracker Barrel before all this happened,
And
right?
yeah, and I never heard about it.
Right. So did, I'm sure, incite a lot of curiosity, nationwide and internationally, especially among, professional people who are watching business news and brands and things like that. So that's an interesting perspective. And Ali, I know you've got weather where you are. I don't know if you're able to chime in, but you're welcome to if you'd like on this or anything else.
While you were talking, I was searching about the brand. I never heard about the this brand,
Mhm,
but in my perspective, just I'm seeing the changing the brand logo.
mhm,
I think it was not a, you can say, good move because the brand already they have established is the constant. They established their audience, business, and the long term history, and changing is something you can they lost their worth because building your first brand is taking a long way from zero to top. So coming way in between, I don't know the history of this brand, but if they have taken the brand u-turn from some decay or around that, I definitely see it's a wrong or a bad move to change the logo.
right. Okay. Cool. And Chris, I don't know if you want to chime in on this one or anything else. But we were just talking about Cracker Barrel because, of course, everybody's talking about Cracker Barrel, and this is a branding workshop. So even though it's
Yeah,
not an aviation brand,
yeah, I like marketing and I like branding, so I'm a logo person. So I didn't like the change, but I could see the modern aspect to the new logo. So
Mhm.
we actually went and ate Cracker Barrel this weekend just because of this. So
Wow,
uh, yeah, it worked.
it worked for you, right? Exactly. And I'm
Mhm.
thinking, a lot of international travelers might come to a Cracker Barrel just to see what all of the fuss is about.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the menu was changed. I mean, the same things on the menu, but it was a modern menu with new fonts and stuff like that. So I
Mhm.
definitely noticed that. But I don't know if they intentionally meant to do that and bring more people to know about brand awareness about Cracker Barrel or not. But it worked.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's a really fun example, I guess. If nothing else, it really helps us talk about brand, especially with people who are not familiar or don't think that it's important. It's definitely a big wake up call for that. So
So
yeah, and Anna Marie, you're just joining us. We're actually just talking about the Cracker Barrel controversy. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that you'd like to share. If I can throw you in, or if that's if you'd rather
Oh,
not, that's fine too.
no, it's okay. Yeah, I heard about that. We don't have any in our area.
Ah,
I've always wanted to try one, but yeah, it just goes to show that when something is really a legacy, sometimes it's better not to mess with it.
right. Yeah, exactly. So, that's one case study that is outside of aviation. I'm going to talk about one more that is outside of aviation, and then we'll spend the rest of the day talking about aviation. So this is a luxury car brand, Jaguar, and I believe it is British. At least the cars manufactured in England, for the most part, as well as internationally, like most cars. But their old logo is very illustrative of the name. It looks like a jaguar, etcetera. The new logo, and this was another controversial one that, people who are big car aficionados and others were not in favor of this rebrand and, did not receive it well. And in this case, we have a long enough history that we know that sales pretty much tanked for Jaguar. And I don't know if they're going to recover from this. So in this case, there wasn't really as much of a nuance as there was with the Cracker Barrel rebrand. This was almost entirely negative. I don't know if anybody's heard anything else other than that from Jaguar, or if anybody has any opinions they'd like to share.
Well, Jaguar was always, I use the term a wealthy person's car over there because they were, and it just happens that we did a case study on Jaguar when I went through business school, and they people that bought those cars bragged about how long they were in the shop when they took them in.
Yeah.
And their electrical systems in the UK, formerly Great Britain, on automobiles really, really was bad.
Yeah.
And,
We had a friend that had one that, ended up getting rides to work all the time because it was always in the shop, with electrical problems, so that's,
mhm.
um but, yeah, I mean, it was a beautiful car, you have to admit that, it was a very luxurious, fantastic car if you don't mind not driving it, I guess that's, pretty cool. But,
Yeah.
yeah, I think in this case, it was almost universally, seen as a negative when they did the rebrand. And once again, I think it was just being out of touch with their core customers. I don't know how much research they did prior to doing this rebrand, but apparently it was a ad agency that didn't know the brand well enough.
Well, and not only that, they
Mhm,
forgot because it's a British company,
mhm.
Brits are loath for change.
Okay. They didn't know their demographic well enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, anybody with half a brain knows that because, I mean, heck, even if you watch old movies, but besides that, if you've known any British people,
Mhm.
and if you've ever been to the UK, and we have,
Mhm.
you they don't like change. They still got stuff from back forever.
Mhm. Right. Okay, so let's talk about an aviation brand or set of brands, and this is in response to another question that somebody asked me, um, and I told them we would talk about it today. Should your brand be the company or should it be the product? And here we have Textron, which is a company, and all of the Textron product lines, which are brands.
Yeah. Well,
Where do you spend your time, money, and energy marketing?
you have to have them separated out like that because if you just put Textron on the side of a helicopter, a Beechcraft, um, I mean, you'd be in trouble because nobody could differentiate the products.
Right. Well, and the other side of this is that Bell, Cessna, Beechcraft, especially those three had, and Jacobson still, had a huge history of brand equity before they were bought by Textron.
Exactly.
So, one thing that I think is a mistake is when a big company jumps in and rebrands everything as their own brand. Textron, I think, has done a really good job of keeping their product brands and investing in their product brands as they are and keeping those traditions instead of rebranding that way. So they're focusing their time, money, energy on advertising and promoting and building equity in their product brands, and they don't really care. The only people that care about Textron, of course, are in the investors and business level people. But for the public and for the vast majority of their marketing, they are promoting their product brands. So when we talk about when we jump into our agenda and talk about product brands or talk about brands, we're mostly talking about product brands, and in a lot of cases with aviation companies, the product is the company. Um, but if that is not the case, then I would say drive it down to the lowest common denominator or the lowest common audience, and promote the brand that the customers see most often, or that you want the customers to see most often.
I didn't know they had Jacobson.
Yeah, that was recent. So they're gobbling up everything. It's pretty crazy. All right. So that being said, I don't know if anybody wants to add anything about Textron or how they're doing things, or any other questions. Or if that answered the question, then that's great.
I think it's just as a side comment. I think it's interesting that they have their own finance company.
Mm,
And second interesting thing about that is we bought an airplane once upon a time.
mhm,
And then I had this wild idea for a business where we buy an aircraft every year for 10 years, lease them out to companies, and then sell them
mhm,
every year, 1 year. So 20-year company. Well, after we bought the first airplane, then I decided, okay, let's try this business opportunity, and went to buy the second one. And there wasn't a bank in this country that would touch that. Airplane? Oh, you gotta be kidding. We don't do airplanes. But
Gotcha.
I know better. So, I mean, my credit score was way up there. So then I went to Textron, or Cessna at the time, and said, I can't find finance for this aircraft. And the guy says, oh, we'll do it.
Mhm,
You bought the first one. We know you. Boom.
mhm. You have
Sign
a
it.
history with us.
So we did. It was just that easy.
Right. So one thing I think that's interesting is, when they have a new company or a spin-up company, or where the Textron brand would add value, like Textron Financial, Textron Systems, Textron GSE, they use the Textron brand, so for anything new. But when they buy a brand, they are very respectful of what they're buying, because a lot of what they're buying is brand equity for Bell, Cessna, Beechcraft, Pipistrel, Jacobson, Cushman, et cetera. So all of that is pretty, I think they've done it pretty well.
Wow, they own Cushman too.
They do.
Huh.
Slide's not big enough, but yeah. Any other thoughts about what the brand is? It's not the company. In most cases, it's the product or the product line. In like Cessna's case, they have several brands under Cessna. They've got the Skyhawks, the Citations, the da 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 da, but they're all Cessnas. So, but for the most part, it is the product or product line.
Well,
I
yeah.
think Dodge does, or Dodge's parent company prior to. I bought a Dodge and we got it financed through Chrysler Financial,
Oh yeah.
which is also like Dodge, Jeep, Ram. That now it's not Dodge Ram, it's just Ram.
Okay. I always
So
thought
I
it was a
think
Dodge Ram.
yeah, it was until 2016. I think they changed it just to just Ram. So
Okay.
now Ram is its own brand.
Okay. So the car companies are pushing down on this, pushing the branding down further. That's interesting. And I think, Textron is really smart to do this, because, part of what they're buying is the brand equity, of the company that they're purchasing. So a lot of companies are just, kind of ego driven, and they put their name on everything. I think Textron's done a nice job of, like the Romans, they would let people keep their own language and their own culture and everything else, and just kind of add their own system on top of it, right? So Textron's the Roman Empire of the aviation world. Sorry,
As far as a brand being a product,
Chris.
look at John Deere or Caterpillar.
Mm,
You know, you don't, when you talk to somebody about a piece of equipment you got, oh, it's a Caterpillar.
mhm,
Not what does it?
mhm,
Oh, it's a John Deere.
mhm. Sorry, Chris, we jumped on you.
No, I just
Okay.
I was just saying that Dodge does that. I noticed a lot of car companies. I think even GM does that as well. General Motors.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it
Right.
seems beneficial to have that where you have a parent company and then you brand your product.
Mhm.
Seems to be working out a lot for these larger corporations for sure.
Right, that's for sure, and, I guess you'll notice, like with Cessna, the Cessna kinda gets sublimated to the Citation brand, a lot in their aircraft. So, they picked a level, a mid-level. They don't push it all the way down to the aircraft type like the Cessna 10 or the Citation 10. But they do push the Citation as their primary branding and their primary advertising point, the focal point of their advertising. All right, so let's jump into what we were going to talk about today before we got the questions, and that is the brand workshop. So we do this during onboarding with everybody, but it's probably been a while, if we've done your onboarding a while back, or, if, like Anna Marie, you started with us years and years and years and years ago, before we were doing the onboarding, we may not have done this with you. So this is a great opportunity to walk through this. So, we're going to talk about your target audience. We're going to talk about your colors, typography, logos, other opportunities to use your brand, which a lot of people don't think of, and so on. So when I was working with Wells Fargo, one of the people that was teaching the workshop that I went to said, "You don't own the brand. Wells Fargo doesn't even own the brand. The United States, the citizens of the United States own the brand. Our customers own the brand. Our job is to be a custodian or a good custodian of the brand." It's 150, 100 and something years old at the time. And we don't touch it. We don't touch it. We just make sure that everything that's associated with it is clean and appropriate and fits with the story that we want to tell. So they had stagecoaches, they had, all of these events and everything else that were about the brand. I think when you're starting out, you have absolute control of your brand because you don't have any customers. And that's when you get to make all the decisions and make all the changes and do all the things. But once you start to have a history, or once people start having conversations about you and so on, that ownership transfers to the people that work with you. So ABCI doesn't even own our brand anymore. It belongs to the people that talk about us in rooms that we're not even in. So, when people refer us and so on, we want to make sure that they have a consistent idea of what ABCI is and, how to talk about us with their customers. And we have a really broad brand. For some clients, we do sales training. For other clients, we do their website. For other clients, we do their social media. But we've been trying to make that more consistent and more cohesive so that it makes sense, when people talk about us. Yeah. So colors, and I guess just to come back really quickly to those rebrand problems, I think the people that have problems with rebrands are not demonstrating an adequate amount of respect for their customers, is what it really comes down to. That's why people get mad when a logo gets changed because, like Harley Davidson and even Coca-Cola, people get tattoos of that brand. What does that say to your super loyal audience when you change the brand and they have a tattoo or they have a sign in their shop, that is a Coca-Cola sign that's, 50 years old or whatever? It's kind of disregarding their investment with you. So, I really think that's part of the reason that some of those rebrands didn't go well. It's because of the consideration of the audience.
Budweiser's an interesting because
Oh, yeah.
they sold there are mirrors and other paraphernalia around this country in bars and so forth.
Mhm.
Show Clydesdales and
Mhm.
their original way they did things. To change that brand.
Yeah. And storytelling, is such a huge part of the brand. If you take a Wells Fargo or a Budweiser or a Textron, or a Cessna, and talk about the stories behind that brand and the things that people have, experiences, and so on. That's really, really important. Okay, so if you've taken an art class, you've seen these color wheels, and you're familiar with how these work. Basically, and one of the problems that we run into a lot when we do a brand evaluation for folks is lack of contrast. So, if their primary brand color is navy blue and all of their text is in black, that's a problem, because they are not far enough away from each other, and there's not enough contrast to really read well and to have symbols and other things show up with really good visibility. And visibility is really important in aviation because it's a very, very visual um, field. People depend on being able to read signs. People depend on being able to read dashboards. The people who are in aviation process a lot of information visually, probably more than any other industry I've ever seen. Um, John's super visual. He will see something from across the room and react to it before I see it. And I'm reacting to hearing or other things and so forth. But visual is his primary sense. That he relies on all the time, every day. And I think that's true of a lot of aviation people. So, we wanna make sure that we are, choosing colors, and usually we recommend one primary color, one accent color, and they need to be far enough away from each other on the color wheel that, we can see them easily. So, if your primary logo color is a navy blue, then, the obvious choice is something across the way. A nice yellow or orange or even a light green, would work. But you want something that is as far apart as you can get, ideally. And I know a lot of this is aesthetic, and a lot of this is already decided if you have an old brand that you've inherited. But, if you're choosing a new brand, or if you're tweaking a new brand or deciding what would look good, consider the color wheel. Thoughts or ideas or questions on that? Angel, I know you've done, a lot of design courses and other things. I don't know if you've seen any color problems that you'd like to mention?
I know I also agree with the contrast because some really is so difficult to adjust on the designs because we need something light, but their brand is super dark, so we really need to add some gradient on the background, and choosing the right colors is what makes we attract our clients because it will be stuck in their head that, oh, that color is familiar, I saw it from somewhere, like
Mhm.
that.
Agreed, agreed. And, the other thing I think is if you're starting from scratch with a new brand, choosing, a primary color and an accent color is a really important decision. Even if you don't use your accent color in your logo, you can use it other places in your marketing. But having a nice set of colors is really, really important so that your, ads look consistent and your stationery looks consistent, your uniforms look consistent, and your cars look consistent. All of those things are really recognizable from a distance. So, we're kinda cruising through this just because of time today, so stop me if you have questions or issues. If we are looking at colors that are traditionally used in aviation, and since most of our clients are not United Airlines, they're not that size, they don't have the kind of, time or money to invest in research, it is sometimes really helpful to pick a bigger brand that serves the same demographic that you do, and see what they're doing, because that gives you a good starting point for research and for other things. So, in the United States, especially, blue is by far the most popular color for aviation brands. Red is a close second in the United States. In Asia, red is number one, followed close second by blue. So, and the nice thing is those are across the color wheel from each other. So, if you were to choose 2 colors and you wanted to be your goal was to be traditional aviation brand, you've got a pretty good solid foundation with that. Um, and we've also been seeing a lot of green lately, especially with brands that want to be seen as sustainable or that want to appeal to that market. Anybody surprised by anything you're seeing here?
So some of us like me that don't understand this color crap.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, I know what looks good to me, but that doesn't mean I know what looks good to the majority of people.
Okay. That's cool. That makes sense, but you do like high contrast. I have
Oh,
noticed that.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Of course.
absolutely. Okay. And that's another note is, that my brother and my son, and I think my grandfather, I don't know because he's not around to say, were all colorblind. And, that happens more often in men than women. I escaped it probably because of the X chromosome or whatever, but most of our clients, still the majority of clients, and customers in the aviation industry are male. And so we have a higher than usual population of colorblind folks. So we need to do that. Besides the colors, we have to do the dark to light contrast as well, just to make sure that if we look at an image, and if we're doing like a print ad or something like this, and Anna Marie, I know you probably want to chime in on this. Ads need to look good using any printing process, or if they get translated at some point to a black and white.
Yes. Our printer tells us all the time that certain colors will not print as well or will become muddy in print.
Yeah.
So, we try our best to avoid that muddiness. And another thing I wanted to say is because aviation is so tied to patriotism and so many people in our industry are so patriotic and so loyal to the country, the red, whites, and blues tend to really make things pop.
Yeah, that's true. We didn't include that in here, and maybe we should. That we've got a higher percentage of former military. Most military uniforms in the United States are either blue or green. Depending on the brand.
Except
Yeah,
for the battle fatigues.
true. Yeah, those are green, blotchy, and camo. But whenever the color is chosen for reasons other than practicality, it's almost always blue, right? Or white if you're Navy.
Yeah.
So, military people, you can never go wrong with blue. And colorblind people, you can never go wrong with blue because you can go dark, light, any variation of that, and it'll work pretty well. So then we've got a colors checklist. You can go through that. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts or questions or problems with color that you'd like us to talk about, or if we should move on to fonts.
How do you choose fonts? Seriously.
Okay, let's talk about how you choose fonts. All right. Oh, yeah, one more thing before we leave color, and that is, just make sure that you document your colors. We use the Canva brand kit, which uses the hex value, which is great for digital. If you're doing print, then you would use, depending on the printing process, one of these other codes. But it's good to have documented your codes for all of your colors so that they're consistent, whether you're using print or digital or anything else, so that when you get materials done for your trade shows, your backdrops, your printed materials, etc., they look like the same colors as your website. We've had situations, in fact, at Wells Fargo, of course, I keep coming back to that. Everybody was issued a set of color chips, to do press checks. And whenever you picked something up from the printer, you were expected to compare it against these color chips. And if it didn't look good, for whatever reason, the printing went awry or something, you send it back, and every one of their contractors for printing had a contract with us saying that it would stand up to a press check against these color chips. So, you know, printing can be, and Anna Marie may have things to say about this as well, can really mess up um, the way something looks if you're not specific about your colors and if you don't document those correctly.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'd have to talk to my printer about this, but their process is interesting. Like, they only have 4 colors that they use, and they have to
Exactly.
mix them to make
Mhm.
different ones. So if you have something that is dark or an unusual color, it may come out muddy depending on how they're mixing things. Um, and so I mean, before you print anything, I would consult a professional,
Mhm.
just to make sure it's not gonna be muddy. But we did actually have a case where somebody submitted a yellow airplane, and this was like the front cover photo, but something went wrong and it came out orange or red.
Mhm.
And of course, we had a fit and we called the printer immediately and said, "This isn't right. You can't have it like this." And, you've completely misbranded the airplane. So I remember that being one of the biggest disasters in our publishing empire career. So you got to
Mm.
just be really careful, get the professional's opinion before you hit go on the proofs.
Yeah. And some photographs are really hard to print, and I get that because of, the printing process. Like you said, they're mixing 4 different colors to make this work. So, and I guess we're not gonna go into all of the, chemistry and everything else of how to make that work. I guess the moral of the story is leave it to the professionals and don't expect things without a proof. Always get a printed proof if you're gonna be doing a large number of printing or investing a lot of
I
money.
was gonna say, we always we send our stuff to the printer, but then we go look at one of them before we buy the lot.
Yeah. And, so yeah, and although we work remotely with folks, we really do recommend that you have a local printer that you can actually go in and see what's being done. We love Vistaprint because they're super, convenient and everything else, but I wanna get my hands on something before it goes out in the mail, just because of some of those printing phenomenons that happen. Other questions, comments, thoughts on color and consistency, etcetera? Alright, moving on to fonts. So, John, how do you choose a font? That was your question. Let me ask you why you're asking. Are you, looking for something in particular, or are you just browsing?
No, I'm curious because, I mean, I'm not good enough to choose a font, but I can tell you when it's wrong.
Yeah. I think one of the things that really brought this to people's attention was, Steve Jobs was in a calligraphy class before he and actually, I think he was more influenced by that calligraphy class in college than he was in a lot of his computer science classes. So a lot of what he did was take, uh, technology products that other people developed, and he made them look cool. So and typography was super important to him, and he really changed the way computers process fonts and other things. Before Apple, everything was kind of this dot matrixy. John and I are old enough to know this, but there were no fonts. Everything was just kind of symbolic. It's just made up of dots. And then Steve Jobs was really, I think, the person that made it the most. He saw the importance of readable fonts and fonts that convey emotion or convey something other than the letters that they represent. And so we've got some examples here of this, coffee, for example. It looks like coffee. It looks like coffee makes you feel, it's all jittery and the be happy, of course, it's very informal and other things. So you can convey a lot with art, with line and with form and with other things, um, that is beyond the letters that you're representing, right? And then, of course, there's 2 big categories. I guess the first big decision that you have to make is, do you want a serif font or a sans serif font? And the serif fonts are more readable if you're printing lines and lines and lines of text, and you want somebody to be able to read and retain that information, then serif fonts actually perform better, than sans serif fonts, which, are a little bit more modern and cleaner and, look better, but they're actually a little bit harder to read large chunks of text because your eye will drift off the line if you're not careful. Uh, so you can actually read faster in a serif font than you can in a sans serif font. They've done some testing to figure that out. So that's your first decision is, do you want a serif font or a sans serif font? And we actually recommend one of each, one serif font and one sans serif font for most brands so that you can use the sans serif fonts for headings and other things, and you can use the serif fonts for large chunks of text. I guess if there's been a trend, it's been toward the sans serif fonts. As we trend toward simplicity and toward more modern looking brands, the sans serif fonts look better and people aren't reading books anymore. They're kind of scanning things and reading shorter materials. So the sans serif kind of fits that.
Which is interesting. You say that, but then bookstores are still around, and I still read books, of course.
Of course.
Target market you're talking about, but I still read books. I prefer the paper book.
Right. So if you want, if you're targeting a traditional audience, and most of us are, because a lot of the decision makers and people who have the money, authority, and need to make a decision in the aviation industry are an older demographic, so a more traditional font will be more appealing to that target market. If you're going after younger folks, then sans serif is an obvious choice as well. Then there's a million different choices you could make. I think there's hundreds of fonts in Canva, and then there's hundreds more that you can buy online. Um, so I would say our bias is usually to use what you have been using unless there's a reason to change it, just for the reason that we talked about, the brand equity and all of those things. Did that answer your question, John? Or
Yeah.
yeah?
Sweet.
Okay. It gives you a place to start anyway. And so I would say, if you don't have fonts chosen, get with a professional to help you choose those fonts. And somebody like Angel can put something nice together for you, or somebody like Adila or Ali can put something together for you that's going to look good and represent what your brand is about. Um, if you already have fonts chosen, don't change them unless you have a very good reason. Um, so here's a checklist of things to consider about typography and fonts. One thing we run into, I guess, with clients is if they have a font that is very unique, it can be um, interesting to use that on their website because we have to buy a license. And then, some browsers may not support that font, if it's very unique and, very interesting. So then it's going to display an alternative, which may not be what you're after at all. So, we have had clients that have um, very unique fonts with licensing restrictions and other things that we can't use everywhere. And, so that's a consideration. You want to make sure that either it's a Google font or it's a Canva font, or, that it's a really convenient, easy to get, easy to use, uh, common font that is going to be displayed consistently every time. Thoughts about that? I don't know. Adila, Ali, Angel, especially you guys, since you use fonts all day, every day.
So you say that some browsers don't support a given font.
Right.
And is that something they have to preload? So they have to have the digital file to make that work? Or is that something else?
Yeah, you can preload a font. You can purchase a font, preload it with the website, but it does two things. One, it takes another second or, some amount of time to preload that font before it displays the page. And number two is, there may be licensing issues with some browsers, some states, some countries, whatever, where they will not display that font, for whatever reason, and they're going to display a backup or alternative, which may be completely not what you want.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, if you're using a really weird font that was licensed by a small company or something like that, and the licensing is different than you expect, then you have some problems with that.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Logos. So, logos are really, really fun. It's not the end all and be all of a brand, but it's often the starting point. When a client already has a logo, that's where we get our fonts, where we derive colors, fonts, a lot of things from this symbol. And it is something that I think people kind of over and underestimate the importance of a logo. You can have a very simple logo and still do very, very well. Uh, or you can have a very complex logo and, do just fine as well. Some of the really fun ones, I think, in here, Aviation Propellers, they have a history, with, it's veteran-owned, it's an older company. They have art in their hangar from the Mighty Eighth, which was a World War II, outfit that did a lot of nose art on, those vintage bomber aircraft and things like that. So, that's where they get Daisy, who is their mascot, and they use Daisy in a lot of their marketing, and I think it's really cool that they have her included in their logo. They do have a version of the logo without Daisy, that they use for things that are very small and very simple, but, those kinds of brand assets are, especially if there's a story behind it, really adds a lot, I think, to your logo. Wells Fargo does not include their Clydesdales or their Stagecoach or anything else in their brand or in their logo, but it's in a lot of their advertising. So if you have a story that either fits in your logo or you have some variations that include that storytelling, I think that's a great thing. One thing I've noticed about all of these is that they all have either an airplane or an airfoil or an upward swoop. Um, Almost without exception, or a forward slant, it's a motion, uh, a visual indication of either a wing or motion or forward or air, in every single one of these logos.
It'll be interesting to see what the up and coming drone companies use.
Yeah, are they gonna go with the quadcopter? Are they gonna go with the, um, what do you call that? Airfoil, um, traditional airplane-looking thing?
Well, there are drones that are fixed wing, so it's
True.
interesting. And then there are drones that have 8 to 12 rotors on top. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I know farm spray drones, they're mostly doing, the quadcopters because that's their, target, market uses those in what they do. So, yeah, it'll be fun, but I think form follows function. Whatever it is that you are telling stories about, you need to visually match that. And so, the airplanes, the history, the air, all of that is really cool to see in these logos. Anybody have a favorite they'd like to share that we didn't include here? Or an observation about these? I've noticed, there's an overwhelming amount of blue, in logos here and
Just
elsewhere.
aviation logos, or is that logos in general?
These are aviation logos.
No. What
Oh.
your observation?
Observation about blue in aviation logos, yeah. Other logos, there's been, according to the literature, the marketing literature and everything else, the most common color for new logos, or the most commonly included new color or most commonly included color in new logos is green. So there seems to be a trend that direction as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's not aviation, that's across retail and so on. So, the problems that we run across, what we would have done differently if we were doing our ABCI logo over again, and we're not going to because of brand equity and, all of those reasons, we would not have included a gradient in our logo. If you look at our logo on our website and things like that, you'll notice that it goes from black to white. If you look at it on my wall, this is a piece of metal that was cut out, so we can't include a gradient. So we have a flat one color version of it. And, I would recommend that whatever your logo is, you need to have a flat one color version of it for things like metal cutouts or embroidery or t-shirts or, any other thing, or ice sculptures, I think is um, our ultimate test. If it will look good in an ice sculpture, then it's a simple enough logo. We also like to have an icon, which may be a very small version of your logo that will look good in a 19 by 19 square, which is the smallest it ever goes, and that's for your the little thing that you see at the top of the browser on a tab. You need to have a version that will work for that.
19 by 19 what?
Pixel,
Okay. You
yeah,
said
right. That's the smallest they ever go, but, if you can get a simplified version, that we can use for that, that's the simplest or the smallest we ever need to go. All right. Questions about logos, thoughts? Carrying on. Um, so, on one end of the scale, we've got the Wells Fargos and others that do not want anybody to come anywhere near their logo. If it's ever on a banner with other logos and so on, it has to be at least 20 pixels away, in printed materials and everything like that. You do not touch the colors, you do not touch the fonts, you do not do anything with that logo. And some of our clients are that way. And we want to just make sure that we document that in your brand guidelines and things like that if that's a decision that you make. And it's a good decision to make, depending on your situation. Another decision you can make on the other end of the scale is let's go crazy with the logo. Google has done that. Avion Trace has done that. And those are fun ways, to kind of animate or, make your logo more relevant to a particular situation. Avion Trace does it for holidays. So this is their Christmas logo, their 4th of July logo, their St. Patrick's Day logo. This is their all other days logo, their standard logo. And Google, famously does Google Doodles, where they have people submit animations and artwork and other things involving um, the Google name. And, it's a fun way to draw attention to your brand if that's a decision that you make. But I think you need to either go one way or the other, and you need to not mess with your logo or mess with it under very specific circumstances. Cool. All right. And then I think a lot of people overlook a lot of brand opportunities like painting your parking lot, having parking for citation owners only or something like that. I mean, there's lots of things that you can do that are fun with your building, with your parking lot, with your uniforms, with amenity kits, with stationery. There's a lot of things a lot of ways that people come into contact with your company. And every one of those is an opportunity to uh, illustrate your brand in a subtle way or in a obvious way. So, just think about that with a really, really, really open mind. And, think about all of the ways that you could use your brand. I don't know if anybody has any examples of things that they've seen that are really fun. I've seen staircases, like Paris Hilton's plane has the her taglines and things like that on the stair risers into her airplane. Those are ways to use your brand in some kind of playful ways that are unexpected.
Well, both Cessna and Harley and others on their key fobs.
Yeah, key fobs, swag, mhm, T-shirts,
Since Tesla doesn't have key fobs,
mhm,
they missed that one.
right, exactly. That is for sure, and, I guess that's one thing that we should do more of is, more of the, uh, interesting, creative, and fun ways to use our logo in different ways. And then brand brief or brand board, we're gonna wrap up with this. We have a full 24-page brand brief that our team has put together, put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into, and lots of different decisions and things like that. We do that for our titanium level clients as well. We can do a long and involved brand brief that talks about every single question, discussion, and everything else, and it's about your visuals and your voice. How do you want your brand to sound? What's the way that you want to say things? We don't answer the phone this way, we answer it that way. Those are things that we can get into a lot of detail on a brand brief or a brand board. So, for our silver clients, of course, the brand kit in Canva is a great place to start, and that does a really nice job of creating that consistency. But we can go way beyond that into a lot of decisions that will take it to a whole new level or several levels up from that.
Yeah, what's interesting is currently we always have a human answer the telephone. when they come up with business hours.
Yeah.
It's going to be interesting to see if those companies that do that
Mhm.
are able to retain people to do that as AI advances.
Yeah, and that's almost part of our brand as well, is that, the human touch. We would never have a robot answer the phone during business hours. That's,
Currently,
right.
if we
Till
get
they
to
get
the point
better.
where no humans willing to do it, then what?
Right. That's for sure. Okay, so how do you measure your brand equity or your brand effectiveness? And these are the traditional ways of doing it: surveys, social media listening tools, web analytics. Of course, we use SEMrush, and we look for branded traffic on your SEMrush report. Branded versus non-branded traffic. I think in our industry, we want to have at least 50% non-branded, people who are looking for the product or service that you sell, and then 50% branded. Is it kind of a good ratio there? 50% of the people that are coming to your website are looking for you because they know your name. 50% are looking for the particular product or service that you sell. All right, and then the next page is just kind of the different ways that ABCI can help with your brand, onboarding, your brand kit, office hours, group office hours. We can answer questions about brands. We can do a brand audit or a harmonization. We do those for clients all the time where their brand has kind of evolved or gotten out of sync across different platforms. Or the full 24-page brand brief is another thing that we can do for you on request. So let us know how we can help you with your brand. Any thoughts, questions, or anything you learned today that you didn't know before as we wrap up?
I think you mentioned some good points. And one thing that we've come across that we've had challenges with over the years is when people hear in-flight magazine, they think of something in the big corporate jets or the big airlines, because they're not recognizing us as a brand. An in-flight magazine is a magazine in an airplane. And just proving that we are a GA brand has been a challenge. So that's really something I want to contemplate and think about. And I'd be open to hearing any ideas that you have about improving that situation.
Yeah, we might be able to do it with humor. We might think of some ways to do some social posts. Is in flight, does that mean in flight, while you're flying? Or does that mean in flight while you are sitting in the back seat? And it's, for front seat drivers is really what you're going for there.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be good if we could work on that.
Yeah, no, let's think about that. Yeah, any other quick thoughts before we jump into group office hours? Or in fact, I think I'm just going to leave the room open as we go into group office hours, and then I'll split the recording right here.